Hello everyone, time for a video response, off the cuff, legitimately this time, looking at the conversation between Brooks and Sargon to show where Sargon failed to make appropriate use of his intellect and points to prove the regressive left exists to Brooks's satisfaction. It is an unfortunate case of how you can misuse your points and your argumentative style against someone. Brooks's style was well known beforehand. Before talking to him, anyone should have taken a moment to research his methods of having conversations with others. I don't think Sargon did. Now, I'm going to couch this in terms of almost a martial engagement between Sargon and Brooks. It's literally a fight tape analysis right now of intellect. I want to focus on how Sargon should have done certain things, how Brooks did do certain things, and places for anyone to improve when they engage in conversations or discussions or debates, especially adversarial discussions such as this one. There's techniques, there's cues, there's methods that you can easily use to best your opponent. There's also an equivalent number of techniques, methods, and approaches that can undermine your own argument. And there's a few things to take note of right out the gate. First, this is Brooks's show. He is the master. He has the production team behind him. There's claims that Sargon's mic was muted for a chunk of the interview at times. They're saying he wasn't. Sargon was saying it was. You watch their post of it. There's some strange gaps as compared to the uncensored one, which we will be looking at here in a moment. Next is Brooks has the original video which Sargon responded to. So he has contacted Sargon for the discussion. He is the one who is initiating the fight. Gauntlet has been thrown down, and it's now Sargon's role to engage with this in a meaningful way to spread his ideas through Brooks's medium. So, let's see what Brooks has to say.
All right, are we all set?
Yes, we are.
You set, Kelly?
Who the fuck is Kelly?
All right, so we'll be live in about we're live whenever.
Good thing it's whenever.
All right.
All right.
Yep.
Welcome
Thanks.
to a Majority X debate between Michael Brooks and Sargon. You're not, like, Sargon of Akkad, because forgive me, I actually confused you with Sargon of Iberius.
Boom, there it is. Before the interview has even got underway officially to the point of discussion, before they've introduced the topic, we just know that this is a debate, and here's Sargon of, I'm going to make fun of you. This is a guy who doesn't give a shit about Sargon, doesn't give a shit about his ideas, looks down upon him, he's condescending, he's going to insult Sargon in a variety of ways, both by interrupting him, talking over him, and by making fun of his name. And even if you listen to the first few seconds of this, he goes, oh, well, where are you from? Close to London? No. Oh, well, yeah, I was going to go to London one time. What the hell is the purpose of talking about that? There's no purpose other than, hey, look at me, I'm special. He's a very condescending guy. And at that point there, you should be positioning yourself to land as many early shots in him as you can so that condescension seems more like a defense mechanism rather than confidence, rather than swagger. And unfortunately, Sargon doesn't do that, so he ends up using that to his advantage.
But this is Sargon of Akkad, and we are going to be debating the progressive left meme, terrorism, Islam, the Middle East, and figuring it all out together. I know people are watching on the live stream. We'll obviously post this again later after it's all over. And before I go further, I want to welcome Mr. Sargon himself. So
I got a quick stop here because there are certain limits on how you can approach these videos for copyright reasons. You don't want to step outside of fair use.
Sargon, how are you?
Hi there, very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have an opportunity to have this this confrontation with you.
Slow start, sorry.
This friendly confrontation.
It won't be that friendly.
So, I guess we'll sort of start this conversation off. This is how it went, because
Oh, and fret not, this will not go the whole length of the interview. I only need a small section at the start of this to illustrate some very important points of where Sargon could have taken over this interview early, dominated throughout, and put Brooks back on his heels to the point that he would have to begin conceding points, but we'll get there.
I do a segment for Majority X, which is the Majority Report's YouTube channel, called Debunked, where I take ideas like Barack Obama's a secret Black Panther. Number one is that a lot of people...
Okay, skipped a little bit here. He's going to list, in a very simplistic way, reasons behind why he thinks those who can be labeled the regressive left, not that the regressive left doesn't exist outright, but the regressive left exists, but only in a few insignificant, lazy individuals. Okay, that's going to be his argument.
And look, first, before we go any further, I want to concede right out of the gate that if we're doing sort of hunting on social media for people writing stupid things, we can find examples of anything.
And there it is. You see, he doesn't want to spend his time talking about the larger issue, the larger meme of the regressive left, this term used by Majid Nawaz and Sam Harris and now spreading across the internet to better define individuals like Brooks here. He wants to focus it on these egg accounts, these pseudonym accounts, people who are just nobodies, no-name college students that post outlandish things at random times on Twitter or maybe on a Tumblr post, more or less nobodies, complete nobodies, and we should ignore them.
So I'm sure that there are some people who have justified, even terrorism in some instances. There's people who've justified human rights abuses because of a kind of delusional cultural relativism.
Right, okay. So we agreed from the gate that there is such a thing as the regressive left.
Well, not
you've just said it existed. Hang on, you just said it existed. And the end conclusion of your video was the regressive left doesn't exist.
And Sargon gets a very good shot in here. You said the regressive left doesn't exist. Now you're coming to me telling me, hey, what do you know? You're saying they do. This is an important point. Should it have been made at that moment? Absolutely. But not in that manner. When he's conceding this point, you have to force him to agree that you recognize that there is a problem of impact and leave it there. Let him continue. Let him lay out the rest of the points, because when you start in a conversation like this, by your opponent laying out each individual one of his or her points, you can then go point by point, ripping them apart, debunk each one, and use that debunking as support for your own point.
So I'm going to explain that.
Yeah,
so it exists as, in the same way Bernie Bros exist. In the sense that, yes, you can find maybe one or two examples of people writing dumb things, but as a large, organized, politically effective force, no, it does not. And I'm going to explain the three... Wait, hold on.
A politically effective force. Remember that. That's going to be important later.
Hold up. I'm going to explain the three variables, and then you can go ahead.
Okay, go on.
Okay. So number one, it doesn't exist that the sort of prime people driving it are people who seem to be like yourself, unfortunately, that are people who want to claim the term liberal, but also engage in lazy ahistorical generalizations about Islam.
So he's put it in context of Islam in this point, and also that there's people who want to call themselves liberal out there that are taking that label away from me, in his point of view. And I don't think that's right. I think I'm the liberal and they are not. Okay? He's claiming a particular identity for himself. Obviously, when we engage in this particular method, this is the no true Scotsman fallacy. It's a pointless fallacy. It should have been chucked immediately and used against him. Liberals are individuals who value freedoms of the individual over that of the collective. But when you have individuals out there who decide that the collective deserves special protection because of a particular identity, then you're undermining the individual rights of the people not only outside the collective, but also inside the collective.
So that's why this term floats around a lot. Number two, it seems to appeal to people who do not want to do the actual homework and take on the intellectual challenge of, as an example, studying history.
So if you're not my kind of liberal, you are lazy. You don't do the work. You don't care about putting the effort in. He takes this, again, condescending approach to try to diminish the position of his opponent, in this case, Sargon. It's another point which can quickly be twisted around on him, but isn't. Not only immediately, but when Sargon begins to be able to respond.
Studying policy. Understanding why we are where we are with an issue like Islamic terrorism or Islamic extremism. These are people who don't want to engage in a conversation on, as an example, who funded Wahhabism and the role of Saudi foreign policy in developing that and the role of Western policy in...
Banana. Just have to take a quick break there. Fair use.
Developing Saudi foreign policy. These are much more complicated discussions than just internet memes. And people who use the term regressive left almost always want to avoid them. And number three, the reason it's a problem...
And by avoid them, he means avoid the policy discussions, the historical context discussions, as if the only reason that any of these events could happen is because of previous historical events which force it in that direction. There is no way whatsoever that a book full of ideas could shape the behaviors of individuals who follow that book in a religious way. Right? That is effectively what he's trying to say. That history, especially American-influenced history, has a greater impact than a book that was around well before the American superpower ever came to be.
To talk in a reductionist and dumb way about Islam is not because it's PC or it hurts people's feelings or all this other mishigas. That's Hebrew. Yiddish, by the way.
Again, that disgusting condescension. What flippancy to the topic at hand. It's not only disrespectful to his audience, it's disrespectful to the guest, a person that he has willfully invited on to have a discussion. He's shitting on Sargon. Now, you can take that and use it against him. Like I said earlier, he's going to use that as confidence and swagger. You've got to get that away from him. You've got to undercut him there so it now looks as a desperate defensive mechanism. But he, being Sargon in this case, has to be stoic about it. I'm sure he's picking up on it. Do not let his words affect your emotions. They can't. Only you control your emotions. So let him say what he will and focus just on the content within his words, not how they're said. If the content is vacuous, pointless, like he's just used here about, oh, this is actually Yiddish, discard it. It's irrelevant to the discussion.
The reason is because we need to be very smart and very precise and very strategic in understanding these issues, precisely because terrorism is an important issue, as is multiculturalism, as is the quest for human rights and reform within not just Islamic countries, but in fact globally. So when we make dumb, generic...
Brief pause here again. Arguing the reductionist point of view. In other words, each and every event is steeped in extremely complex, challenging topics that to at any point extract a single idea out of that soup would be to diminish the entirety of that point. It cannot exist outside of its entire context. Where this is entirely wrong is that was an integral part that came about to making that soup. Right? Maybe this is going to be a good reference for some, maybe not, but the metaphor is as follows. Think about mirepoix. It's onions, celery, carrots. Onions could mean the U.S. foreign policy element. Those carrots could mean a particular governmental shaping of particular political ideologies, and I think celery is left. Celery is the actual Islamic ideology. If you go into that soup and you pluck out a chunk of celery and you say, hey, look, this is the idea that contributed to this soup in such a profound way that without it, the soup would nowhere near be the same. What Brooks tells you is, well, you can't do that because it actually diminishes the entirety of the soup. But in actual fact, you can do that, and you must do that because there is an idea which is the impetus behind actions. People have agency. They look over particular ideas, and using those ideas as appropriate to the context, will act upon them in the way they can best interpret it. So in the Quran, it doesn't actually say to cut, or the Hadith, sorry, to cut the hands off of thieves. It says strike or cut the hands of thieves. That could mean a slap on the wrist. That could also mean using a little paring knife and give them a slit to mark them on the back of the hand that they are a potential thief. Or you could interpret it to take the whole sword out and lop the whole hand off. The idea was listed in the Hadith and was then acted upon by followers of the faith, to which degree is determined mostly by culture.
Overgeneralizations about Islam, we undermine the work of people like Fatima Mernissi, as an example. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She was a prominent Moroccan Islamic feminist.
Name dropping. Is a name important to an idea? I would probably say no.
Asma Jahangir, who's a Pakistani human rights attorney who's worked in Pakistan for several decades. Khatami, Ahmed Musali, who are both Islam and democracy theorists.
Again, more names. Look at these people I know. Not inherently condescending, but still not contributing very much content to the discussion.
Working on theories of reconciling Islam.
In other words, this is just footwork here. He's not throwing any blows. He's not trying to grapple or do a takedown. It's footwork. He's trying to position himself in a stronger space, he feels, to begin striking again.
With democracy. Now, these projects may or may not be successful. But if you're saying that you are compassionate and concerned about the human rights dimensions of what is happening inside Islamic societies, and then you turn around and you say that Islam is one monolithic thing, or the motherlode of bad ideas, which you co-signed on in your video attempting to take me down, then, okay, so you absolutely did. Okay, so great. When you co-sign on that, and then you say you want to support reformists within the Muslim world, you're engaging in a performative contradiction, and again, avoiding doing the actual legwork of the real historical, real policy investigation that is required to forward what you claim you want.
Okay, that was a longer segment, but I wanted Brooks to use his own words here. The start of the segment, he was speaking of particular individuals and how these are individuals in a variety of different spots around the world, particularly in Islamic countries or countries with a strong Muslim majority. They're working to democratize Islam or to democratize their state, to move it away from theocratic trends and into more secular manners. A brief Wikipedia search of these individuals will bring that up for you. But then he goes on to say that these people may or may not succeed. Okay, that's all well and good. For the most part, we want them to succeed. I don't think that there's individuals out there that are like, yeah, well, they're not my kind of Scotsman, so therefore I want them to fail. The very next sentence, he says, because you dismiss these individuals who he claims as his own, you are in a performative contradiction, his words, against the whole enterprise. This is utterly ludicrous argumentation, and how it wasn't picked up on is beyond me. But in short, the statement that you want to see Islam reformed away from being the motherlode of bad ideas is inherently self-sustaining. You don't need to put a bunch of names on top of it. And if you start saying, well, you don't support these people, therefore you don't support the whole enterprise, that is the simple reductionism, the simple overgeneralization that he is lamenting here, that people who claim to be part of the regressive left, or who are targeting those who are apparently part of the regressive left, are engaging in. He has made a very potent, although overreaching strike off balance, and is now very much exposed to being beaten brutally by a very brief minuet and grab. There's not much more that Sargon would have had to do in this debate other than this moment here, taking that overreach and using it wholly against Brooks.
So the conclusion is that it's a thing that exists in tiny pockets. It's vastly inflated in terms of its importance. People who inflate it in terms of its importance don't want to do policy or history or geography or economics. And as a result of not...
Again, he's referring to the large soup here, where you have to know exactly everything and they have to come into being simultaneously, and you can't remove any single element from it because then it completely undermines the entire structure.
Wanting to do policy, history, geography, or economics, it leads to dumb ideas, bad policy, simplistic and delusional understandings about very important things. Look, I don't play video games.
And now he's trying to... This is a more sophisticated ad hominem here against Sargon. Rather than just shitting on him directly and saying, you're an idiot, he's decided to say that instead, Sargon needs to keep in his domains, right? You need to know your place, in other words.
So I don't make YouTube videos about them. It's important to have a grasp in the ground of what you're talking about.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Well, I'm convinced I'm talking to someone from the regressive left now.
Boom! Immediate failure by Sargon. He just defined what he thinks someone of the regressive left is in 3 points. And quite simply, that was he doesn't view someone who's part of the regressive left is not actually a liberal in his mind, that they are lazy, that they don't study history or policy or whatever, and as a result, and his 3rd point is they tend to be overly simplistic and reductionist by nature. So these are the points that has defined his understanding of what someone who is part of the regressive left is, and he doesn't see himself in that. Okay, this is a giant chasm between his definition and how he views himself. To turn that around and say, well, I'm talking to someone part of the regressive left, that is too big of a gap to jump. You're going to put him in a very aggressive stance here to defend his sense of himself versus his understanding of what is part of the regressive left. It is a stupid approach. It is a bad approach. It is something that Sargon should have avoided.
If that's any help to you in identifying exactly what's going on.
Profound help.
Well, you do seem to be under a few misapprehensions. Okay,
but go into actual...
And then, see, power versus power. Sargon made the claim, and immediately Brooks is going back with power. He doesn't care that he just had a giant monologue. He doesn't care that Sargon now needs to spend the time defining a term. He is going to speak over Sargon. He's going to interrupt Sargon because Sargon gave him the opportunity to. Sargon let him go uninterrupted. Sargon let him land these very weak and overreached shots. He let him be condescending. He let him just continue on endlessly. And now, when he finally takes the opportunity to speak, Sargon goes power versus power and tries to jump a gap that was too wide to begin with. You need to ease into it. It's his program. He's on his turf. He's got home court advantage. He's got the fans on his side. Sargon had to have recognized that and let him, being Brooks, hurt himself with his own arguments. And I just don't think the best way to go out is starting in this. And that's why, because Brooks here views the term as regressive left as an ad hominem because he doesn't see himself as one, he then calls Sargon as engaging as ad homs.
No, you've just had like a 5-minute monologue, so let me ask
Go
some
into
questions.
actual detail, though. Don't do silly ad hoc.
I will go into detail, right?
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
how big is big enough for you to regard someone as important.
Whoa, how big is big enough? Well, it kind of depends on how willing you are. No, what is Sargon trying to do here? I mean, he just admitted that Brooks had a monologue. He had his time to speak. So the first thing Sargon does is speak for a few moments and then give the opportunity, give the floor back to Brooks? What the hell is he doing? If you want to focus on the debate and the power that the debate can have in conveying your ideas to the world, look, your goal when you engage in a discussion like this should never be to change the mind of the person you're speaking with. That is a fool's errand, and you will fail miserably. Your goal is to use that platform to spread the ideas. We see this all the time on his live stream channel. So now that he's in this conversation, he has a chance to spread his ideas, and he just gives up the floor back to Brooks after a simple question. How big is big enough? Yada, yada, yada. They're going to go into this. He's going to lay out a bunch of examples, time and again. Just here, let's listen.
First question that comes up. Because you think that the regressive left is made up of unimportant plebeians on the internet making ahistorical generalizations. And not just... The thing...
See, plebs. I'm told by my wife time and again, she says it's plebes. Plebeians. Not plebeians, plebeians.
No, you have to understand as well, is the regressive left is not limited to opinions on Islam. But that is one of the major issues that people are trying to talk about, that the regressive left is getting in the way of. But how big would these people need to be? I mean, what
makes me a member of the regressive left?
Boom! Sargon asks a question, and the first thing Brooks does is pivot. No time wasted. What do you think of X? Well, wait, hold on. What do you think of Y? Is the retort. You gave him the floor. Of course he's going to take control. This is an adversarial discussion. Don't give him that ground. Don't give him that time. When you are in a debate with someone, be clear and concise. Lay out points, especially if they can relate back to refuting the central point of his argument. Again, the very first point of his argument was that these people are likely anybody from the internet, or that they have fallen away from the term liberal and are wholly ahistorical. This has very little to do with size. Okay, you can, as Sargon has, interpreted it as size, but if you want to engage in that particular line of reasoning, you've got to lay it out in a powerful fashion. You've got to say, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about some egg account on Twitter or your crazy cousin on Facebook, or all the way up through different collegiate level professors and national institutions and think tanks and organizations, all the way through to individuals, even the president, repeating some of these regressive ideas or regressive memes to the American people. It's institutions from colleges to think tanks to news outlets that engage in these beliefs. This central thought of belief is that there are ideas which are less important than the identity of the person who holds the idea. Said in a different way, ideas are trumped by identity, or identity over ideas.
No, answer my question.
No, you just threw it out, so I want to know
question.
Why.
How big
No, you answer mine first, because you put a direct accusation at me.
I asked my question first.
You put a direct...
Power versus power here. That's all we're seeing is power versus power. I'm asking the question. I'm asking the question. I'm asking the question. It doesn't move anything on. This is failed grappling here. Neither opponent is getting the advantage over the other. They're not on the floor yet. They're still up, and they're trying to break grabs, and they're trying to land a couple shots in to the ribs. It's not working out for either of them. They're too guarded. They're trying to push the other one over. They're not focusing on the right weak spots.
I don't care. I asked my question first.
It's almost like a standing arm wrestle right now.
I don't care that you care. How big would be big enough?
You don't care that I care.
Sound like John H. John Benjamin there.
Makes me a part of the regressive left. Go ahead.
Literally your opening monologue. And you said you don't...
Yeah, literally. Thanks, Tumblr.
Understand why. So let's actually get into that, shall we?
Now, tell me why I'm in the regressive left.
Boom. Let's get into it, shall we? Again, you ask a question to him, he recognizes it, and instinctively follows right back with a shot of a question of his own. No time wasted there. That is proficiency in this regard. Sargon is polite, he's intelligent, he loves discussing ideas pretty much more than almost anything else beside his kid and his wife. But frankly, that good-natured element has left him weak in this fight. He is in a different weight class right now, and he is not doing too well.
You have made the assertion that the people in the regressive left, who you agree are the regressive left, are not big enough to be important.
Okay, there's a statement. That, in of itself, is powerful. They're not big enough. What he should have done here was opened with this, and then followed into the statement I made, whether you're talking about colleges or governmental office, think tanks, or major media outlets. These ideas persist. He didn't do that, though.
How big is big enough to be important to you?
Again, question. So, before I even hit play, what do you think Brooks is going to do? Yep, you already know it.
What makes me part of the regressive left?
Bingo. Isn't that fantastic? Isn't that so predictable? This is a guy who understands the adversarial discussion. Brooks just... If we're talking about rounds here, there's only 3 rounds that we're going to see. And in the first round here, Brooks is just racking up the points.
What's the question?
No. The question is, how big do you think these people have to be? I mean, do they have to be in charge of a major news outlet?
I think that you can... This is a semantic game.
And now it all comes out. Because Sargon is just trying to do a light slap job of Brooks here rather than landing throat punches, he's given another opportunity for Brooks to completely change the nature of Sargon's point. Oh, this is a game about semantics. Any person listening to this who doesn't already support Sargon and his worldview is going to be immediately siding with Brooks here, because it seems like an intelligent argument to diminish the point that Sargon was trying to make by just saying, it's semantics. You could have it mean anything. And Sargon's job was to eliminate the semantics of it by demonstrating that it is all the way from the pointless, randomly generated egg account on Twitter all the way up to the presidential office and everywhere in between. These regressive memes exist. They aren't centralized in any given point or any given institution, and they don't all ascribe to the same or subscribe to the very same list, although there's plenty of overlap between them. Instead, he let Brooks have full control, and he gets this fantastic shot in on Sargon.
I think if you want to say, okay, so as an example, you guys wheel out Glenn Greenwald as an example of the quote-unquote regressive left.
Absolutely.
Which I don't...
And despite this being more or less what could be considered as Sargon's time to making the discussion, Sargon has given the floor up to Brooks. So now, rather than Sargon coming out and saying, these major media institutions and individuals part of them, guys like Glenn Greenwald and Ezra Klein, and he can go listing off the guys that exist that work at Gawker and at Salon, and particular names from a variety of different places. He's given that opportunity up to Brooks. Now, there's a difference between name-dropping as, look at these great people, and saying, I want to use a well-known individual as an example of regressive thinking. Because you need to work your way towards how Brooks is the regressive leftist. And to put individuals out that are less agreeable to Brooks's worldview, again, this should be something that is done in pre-discussion research, and working your way to individuals that more appear, at least, to represent Brooks's worldview. You're not going to get anywhere. If you drop Glenn Greenwald in, someone who's probably kind of on his way to being similar to Brooks, although I don't think Brooks quite likes all that Glenn Greenwald stands for, it doesn't give you the opportunity to have worn him down some first.
Which is exactly, look, and I actually don't agree with everything that Glenn says about foreign policy.
I wouldn't expect you to.
But mainly, sorry?
I wouldn't expect you to.
But mainly, the reason seems to be, and again, explain what makes him regressive left. If you don't want to explain what makes me regressive left, you're going to have to answer that question. It seems to me that the main objection to him, again, is that Glenn Greenwald engages in policy analysis and history analysis.
Policy analysis and history analysis. Not inherently bad things. And if your argument against Glenn Greenwald is, well, you just use history and policy, and that's it, then yeah, you're going to come across as an idiot. You need to use history and policy and ideology to get a proper picture of things. But you also need to understand where in the hierarchy of importance each of those points lie relative to the topic at hand. So Glenn Greenwald, I don't like him. I don't like him very much at all. But to somehow label him as the one and only guy as the engages in the only history and only policy analysis isn't a very strong argument. And in fact, an example of a regressive leftist that Sargon could have used to bludgeon Brooks with has now fallen into the hands of Brooks proper, and he's wielding it masterfully at the moment.
Which you guys always go to as...
masterfully in the way that when we look back at his original 3-point being owning the term liberal incorrectly, not wanting to do the appropriate work for policy analysis, and reductionist by nature, he doesn't view Glenn Greenwald as any of those 3 points. Therefore, he doesn't view Glenn Greenwald as a regressive leftist. It falls exactly in line with his 3 original points.
That's a justification. That's an avoidance of the issue, even though those, of course, are the main...
This has kind of turned into an impromptu roasting of Sargon, and I kind of feel bad for him because he's probably my favorite YouTuber, and more importantly, he's the guy that has the largest list of overlapping ideals and beliefs that I have, even more so than some of my closest friends and family. I'm sitting in his corner here, kind of as his coach, or maybe just a fan sitting in the front row, wearing all the gear. I've got the fake Sargon mask on. I've got the giant Sargon tee. I've got the bronze-made sword, and I'm sitting there pumping my sword and fist in the air, cheering him on, and just losing steam rapidly, and then trying to cower in my seat, and then slowly taking the mask off and turning my shirt inside out, like just rapidly diminishing away. Like, I don't want to be associated with this because it is just a beatdown right now.
Drivers. But what makes Glenn Greenwald of the regressive left, and or what makes me of the regressive left?
Right, okay, but we agree that...
Okay, again, Sargon gives the floor up. Brooks, boom. Sargon agreed that Glenn Greenwald is someone that individuals critical of what they define as regressive left would view him as. So Brooks has taken that and says, okay, look, you've got me, and now you've got Glenn Greenwald. How are we both part of the regressive left? And Sargon hasn't used a single opportunity yet to lay out in a general sense here what makes someone part of the regressive left at all.
Glenn Greenwald is agreed to be a part of the regressive left.
Well, I don't even...
Agreed by whom, though, right? Agreed by whom? Agreed by your own in-group right now? Like, that, you can say agreed, but that doesn't lay out any of the parameters for which an individual would have to fall in line with in order to be labeled part of the regressive left. In fact, he falls directly outside of the parameters laid out by Brooks. Sargon, you missed this. You are getting thrashed, buddy.
I don't agree to the term. You still haven't explained to me why me or him.
I will get to that, but we have to establish what we're talking about first.
Yes, we do. 10 minutes into this, almost 40 minutes into my analysis, and we are just hearing we have to establish this. Let's see where he goes.
We have. Yeah? So go for it.
And Brooks is right. We have. Because he laid out what makes someone part of the regressive left. This tiny, insignificant nobody that has easily found on the internet as being just a whack job. They tend to be easily reductionist. They tend to not give a shit about doing the effort of figuring out what the history of the policy is. And they are incredibly ignorant when it comes to what the term liberal actually entails. And this is just a fantastic example of him. This is my argument. And I'm going to continually use it against you. And Sargon hasn't refuted a single one of the points yet.
Glenn Greenwald, right? Ezra Klein, would you say that he's someone with a wide reach?
And there he goes again. Here's another question. I want to cede the floor back.
Loud voice on the internet?
Yes, Sure.
So would I. He's also a part of the regressive left.
Okay, so great. Right? I'm excited now. Explain what connects the three of us.
And this might seem flippant here, but I think this is actually honest from Brooks. He is excited to hear how Ezra Klein, Glenn Greenwald, and himself are connected, because to him, Ezra Klein falls outside the definition of his own argument, Glenn Greenwald falls outside the definition of his own argument, and himself falling outside of the definition of his own argument are related and somehow related into the same camp. He's shoring up his own argument using the examples Sargon is giving. Sargon is digging a hole for himself, thinking he can turtle safely away, and Brooks is looking down at him saying, you can't move anywhere, I'm just going to hit you with this stick now.
Calm down, slow down, right? We're not in any...
Sorry, Sargon, I'll calm down and slow down.
So, I mean, would you agree that,
we do actually have a hard out.
Okay,
we have other things to do.
Okay,
so go
that's
ahead.
fine. But
I agree, I actually have other things to do also.
You have to understand, we have to go through this. So the less you interrupt me, the easier this will be, right?
And see, that's condescending. That's swagger. That could be powerful for Sargon. But the problem is, he's been beaten so much so far, it comes across as trying to be overly defensive. You know, it's cringy when Brooks does it, because I think he's a dick, and he is part of the regressive left, because he does fall in line with the exact opposite of the points which he lays out there. You could know policy perfectly. You could know history perfectly. You could almost be omniscient in this regard. But if you diminish out an individual's idea in place of their identity, then what you are doing is being concerned with the wrong element. And therefore you will protect individuals with bad ideas simply because they have a particular skin tone or a particular set of genitalia or are from a particular part of the world. And that's no good.
And the
so the New York Times,
and there it is. And you like that? Sargon's condescending, don't interrupt me and I can get further. And right away, well, if you answered questions, this would go faster. Sargon seems defensive, swagger coming from Brooks.
Would also be a major outlet. You'd agree with that. And Salon.com, would you agree that they are a major?
I've never heard of the New York Times.
You've never heard of the New York Times?
Bear with me.
Okay.
I've never.
Little giggle from, I'm assuming, Kelly in the background. Just because he's owning it right now.
But what about Salon.com?
He can be flippant like that, and it doesn't come across, well, it does come across as very dickish and annoying, but to his own fans, to Brooks' own fans, they're laughing right now. They think it's hilarious.
Have you heard of them?
Is that a bar?
No, it's a newspaper.
Again, Sargon trying to be serious, trying to stay focused on the task at hand, and flippancy coming from Brooks. His fans are going to love this. The people who listen to Majority are loving this. They think it's hilarious. Here's this guy who thinks he can shit on the left, who doesn't know anything, who tends to fall intently, who they believe falls in line with Brooks' opening argument, and he's just absolutely floundering. So Brooks can be funny, he can be flippant, he can be condescending, and it doesn't hurt his position right now.
Wow.
Remember, it's not a debate between Sargon and Brooks. Well, those are the two participants. It's a platform to share the ideas held by each party so that each other's party can hear them, understand them, and maybe Brooks can change the minds of some of Sargon's followers. Not Sargon's mind, but the minds of some of his followers.
I say generously, it's a regressive outlet.
Okay.
Okay, so the main issue is that you're trying to discuss events and people. And we need to discuss ideas.
Okay, this is really important. This is finally getting to some beautiful, red, well-cooked meat here. We need to discuss ideas, not people and events. The idea of what is the regressive left? What makes the regressive left? That's the idea at hand here. That's what we need to be discussing. And he's not. He's not. He's going to go back to people. He's going to go back to events. He's going to seed ground continually so that Brooks can then bludgeon Sargon with Sargon's own attempts at fighting.
Do you understand the difference between those two things?
Sargon trying to come across as in control, calm, but it seems condescending now, doesn't it? Because he's lost so badly in the start, in this very first round here, that that Brooks can just scoff at the suggestion by Sargon.
Before I answer yet another one of your questions, and you're going to explain what makes Ezra Klein, Glenn Greenwald, and myself regressive. Because insofar, all I can tell, the qualities that we share, is that we are interested in policy, history, and the apparatus of how things are actually done.
Boom! Again. Beautiful. What a shot. This was a well-placed body blow by Brooks on Sargon. And it was one that was tight in, that Sargon had no ability to defend, because he allowed himself to get within Brooks's wheelhouse by not defending his own argument and not attacking and undermining Brooks's argument. Had Sargon changed the definitions or refuted the definitions laid out by Brooks, Brooks would have been unable to land that hit using two people that Sargon otherwise views as squarely as a regressive against him. It wholly failed there.
Right. I'm not in any way interested in criticizing your analysis of these things. In fact, I'm going to...
Okay. Not criticizing your analysis of this. Sargon is trying to get out. Okay, you know in boxing when a guy is stuck on the ropes and he hugs his opponent? That's pretty much what Sargon's trying to do right now. He's trying to get back to the center of the ring. He's trying to get distance away because Brooks has got him on the ropes and he's just pummeling him.
Just assume that I agree with what your analysis is.
And we're Jewish.
Right? I don't care.
Is that a factor?
No, why would you think that would be a factor? This is exactly
because I thought it would trigger you. I'm just playing.
Why would it
Go
trigger
ahead.
me?
Boom! It did trigger you. It did trigger you. Sargon was triggered by this joke. Sargon didn't take it as a joke, as he normally would if he was having an open discussion with, let's say, like Bering, or if he was chatting with Goodfella. He took it as serious in that moment. And it makes him seem sketchy, makes him seem off balance, makes him seem very reactive rather than acting out instinctually.
Go ahead, relax.
Okay.
It's all right.
What infuriates a person more than being told to relax when they otherwise think they're calm? That's a poke in the eye.
I'm just joking.
You have to understand, I probably agree with you on your analysis of US foreign policy. I'm in no way a fan of US foreign policy. However, I am also not a fan of the policy of the regressive left. It's interesting that you brought
What is that policy?
What is that policy? Brooks has asked a wonderful question here. What is that policy? Honestly, from the beginning, Sargon has done almost nothing to refute the three central points Brooks laid out in the first 3 minutes of this interview. Nothing. He has tried to pivot around him. He has tried to make arguments. He's tried to do anything he can, and Brooks has bested him at every single attempt. There is nothing Sargon has been able to do yet that has been able to get Brooks off his game. What are those policies? Brooks asks to Sargon here. Those policies are probably not going to be listed. Even though they should be, and even though Sargon should have otherwise practiced, at a very minimum, 20-second block of listing out what would define someone as part of the regressive left. What are the parameters for which an individual would have to fall into the majority of in order to be labeled as part of the regressive left? And he didn't do it. He didn't do it. He didn't practice it. He didn't look into it. He didn't, to the best of my knowledge, research how Brooks engages in these discussions. And it's hurting him big time.
Issues.
Go ahead.
Before anything.
And I think that's part of the why, and this is probably a reach, but right now at this point, I may have some of you convinced who are listening. We're hearing a lot of talk, not only from Sargon, but from some of the hardline fans of his who do not want to go into the critical nature of this particular discussion, that there was problems with mic muting. It doesn't matter if he muted his mic way later into the interview. Sargon, so far, 12 minutes in, has already lost. He is so far behind in points, he is so far behind in blows, that he has no opportunity to turn this around. Or if he does have an opportunity, I don't know how he's going to get there. I don't think we're going to see a Rocky Balboa moment.
Else, because this is something...
What's the policy?
Well, bringing up racial issues. In fact,
that's not a policy.
This is exactly the policy of the regressive left, right?
Ha! See that? That was a policy. That was a joke. He's playing off himself right now, and it's working well for him. Sargon's now going to attempt to do this, but because Brooks has made a joke about it already, it undermines the ability for Sargon to lay that out as an argument.
I've got... Seriously, right, okay. I'm looking at an article from Salon.com.
Boom. Now he's going to a specific example here. Why? Why? Lay out that fucking policy point that you were going to use. Don't go directly to the example and expect that the answer follows. Lay out your thesis and then provide examples. Order matters here. Don't try and land the elbow and then the punch. Let the punch follow, and if you do get the punch, come with the other elbow. Don't do it the other way around, because one's going to put you in way more danger than the other. Right? What is the policy that Sargon is trying to argue? The regressive left tends to value identity over ideas. In other words, the racial group you belong to, the gender you belong to, the ethnicity you belong to, the religion you belong to, somehow matters more in particular cases than it does in others. So when we talk about racism, you will see the left, the regressive left, will view any type of bias towards from whites to blacks as racism, but from blacks to whites as justified prejudice. Okay, this is a regressive ideal. Now, from Salon.com, here's an article. Okay, he's already labeled that Salon.com is a regressive outlet. He's now laid out a policy that he would use to define whether or not someone is regressive. And now for the example. Instead, he starts with the example. And we'll watch what Brooks does.
White people are more racist than they realize. On what possible level do you think it's okay to generalize all white people, or anyone based on their skin color? I mean, that is literally what you're arguing against when it comes to Islam. And this is always a feature of the regressive left.
Okay, so...
Quick pause here. Always a feature of regressive left. Good, you've used an example, and now you're starting to work your way to a thesis, but it should have been the other way around, as I just laid out.
So I'm going to engage in apparently this bar or pub you were referencing.
See, another joke.
Published a thing about racism, so I haven't...
Swagger, in other words.
...read it. I'm not familiar with the article, but I will go based off of the headline. If you agree, and I just want it to be noted that it is very interesting that...
Okay, what he's going to do here is another jab. It's another poke in the eye. It's something that's meant to rile up an opponent, to try and get them off their game, get them more emotionally invested and less intellectually focused. He's going to claim that Sargon still hasn't answered any one of his questions, which he hasn't. In this play-by-play analysis that I'm providing here, you will see that Sargon has not actually answered a question yet properly, to any sufficiency. Because remember, the questions are not, what color is the sky? The question is, here are my 3 central points of what would define someone as a regressive. I do not view myself as a regressive. Therefore, if I am a regressive, how is that so, based upon my definition? Yes, it seems almost tautological, but part of that, there are weaknesses where Sargon comes in, refutes the claims made by Brooks of what makes a regressive, builds up his own definitions, and goes from there. And he hasn't done that. He just hasn't done that yet.
You have not engaged at all and are basically conceding the policy terrain, which is the whole point of my video, and what you said was bullshit.
No, the whole point of your video was to deny the existence of a regressive left. I am not contesting your policy analysis. I'm sure that's accurate.
Do you like that there? Boom. Lays it out on his own, lands the shot, and immediately pivots around back to the original point because he thinks he now has an advantage over Sargon for his positioning. He doesn't linger around. He doesn't engage into the debate or to accept the criticism or congratulations from Sargon about his policy analysis and whatnot. He lands the shot and he moves around back to Sargon's point because he does have the advantage.
The point is the policy analysis, but I'll go into the Salon thing.
This is the point. This is the point that everyone has.
Do you want me to answer? Right? Or go ahead.
Sorry, okay, go ahead.
Boom! He gives... sorry, I keep saying boom because I just keep imagining blows being landed here. There's enough swagger coming from Brooks right now that he even gives the floor back up to Sargon in this case. And what does Sargon do right away? Gives it back. I want to see his answer because Sargon's thinking he's going to say something I can play off of. But he's been thinking that from the start, and he hasn't been able to do it once.
Okay. So what I presume is that the Salon article from this pub, which I have not read, and it's interesting that pubs are publishing articles, that probably what they had done is looked at some research on unconscious racial attitudes and biases. So,
okay, that probably is correct. There's nothing inherently wrong with that statement. The guy hasn't read it. He's making a conjecture about it.
So as an example, you can take a study, and I actually participated in one in college to help somebody for their thesis, where you can rate, when you see names on a screen, you can rate...
Okay, anecdotal evidence, but important. What did he do here? Laid out his thesis. It is probably understanding unconscious bias, and here's an example of how a potential research methodology would work.
Positive or negative reactions to them. Now, you're not told whether or not these are quote-unquote black names or white names or Asian names or whatever, but you can see certain names like, well, in apropos of this conversation, say Mohammed. And if you rate it negatively, maybe that is a cue for biases that you might have that you're not consciously aware of. So
okay. Just on test design, because oddly enough, this is exactly what my very long degree is in. You would have multiple controls there where you wouldn't just ask names throughout. If you're trying to determine racial bias, right, you would, based upon the presentation of names, you would have names, name, object, name, object, name, object. You'd have mixing in objects or events with those names to have a sense of whether or not you can control for just people hitting a button at random or whatnot. You know, and also if you put up the name or the word birthday and someone has a negative reaction to birthday, well, what does that tell you about a person? And what he's saying here in his argument is that if you have a negative reaction to the name Muhammad, you may have a racial bias, despite the fact that if you're a strong anti-theist like myself, when I hear the name Muhammad, I think of the Prophet Muhammad, and I get rather down the path of what was written in the Quran, what was written in the Hadith, what was written in the Sunnah. So, yeah, there's a lot more baggage to that name.
I would assume that the article is just saying that a fair amount of white people hold some biases that they're not necessarily aware of which that's undisputably true and not terrifyingly controversial.
Great, okay, let's take that point. So now if we have data that's very similar that shows us that, for example, the large number of Muslims...
Okay, so this might be the first solid shot by Sargon coming in. Are you ready?
Hold a conscious bias. In fact, this is actually their opinion and attitude on a certain subject. And that subject is remarkably illiberal. What should we do?
Oh, here's what we should do. First of all, what you need to do.
We're getting close. We're getting close. So what, Mr. Brooks, what do we need to do if that particular research study was flipped the other way around and say blacks hold racial bias? Okay, you ready?
When you talk about Muslims, obviously.
Or Muslims in this case.
Is, first of all, disaggregate that polling data. And
interesting.
Any good polling data on quote-unquote white people is going to do that as well. So,
right, but that wasn't your first response to the poll about white people, was it?
I'll finish.
No, but that's an important point.
I'll finish. No,
yeah, but that is an important point that we need to discuss.
That wasn't. Going in doesn't mean I'm not going to answer.
That wasn't your first response about the thing about white people.
See, that is a nice shot, because he's now got, finally for the first time, and I think this was his method from the start, to try and get Brooks caught up in his own words and his own interpretations. It doesn't happen very often in the rest of this. But I wanted to get this point to show at least one positive for Sargon at the end here. He does catch Brooks in his own words here. Not well at all. I think Sargon really failed in this interview. If you know what he's arguing about, listening to his videos, you know where he stands on these things. They're far more cogent. But in this debate that he's had here, he most likely failed to affect any of Brooks's listeners. I'm going to end it here. Thanks everyone for watching. See you soon.